Hi everyone, we're going to go over getting started with Python in Jupyter Notebooks if you don't know how to. So this is also recapped in this file, getting started with the basics and the week 1 content. Okay, so there are a couple files that are also related to this. There's a few Jupyter Notebook files which we'll come to later. The first thing to make sure you have installed is Python 3, and so there's multiple ways to install it. You probably already have some Python installed, but I think using Anaconda is one of the easier ways for beginners to use Python. So we just want to maybe search for, or just go to anaconda.org, or search for download Anaconda. Either one should take us to this page. And so you'll want to make sure that it's correctly auto-detected your operating system here on this top bar, and then download the Python 3.7 version, or whatever the Python 3 version is at the time. So we download that, and then I'll show it in Windows sort of what this looks like. So when you open it up, there'll be a few things: a license to agree to, choose for yourself or all users. I already have it installed, so I'm going to just change the folder name. And it should have this box automatically checked. The register Anaconda is my default Python 3.7. I'm just reinstalling it here so it wasn't checked. And then you definitely, I think, want to check this box for adding Anaconda to the path environment variable. What does that mean? The path environment variable is something that's in all operating systems. So if we just search the Windows bar for environment variables, we get our system properties, advanced tab, click on environment variables, and we can see our environment variables. So we got this path variable, which is under our user variables, and then also the system variables. Within the user variables, we get Anaconda added to our path when we check that box in the installer. In Mac, this I think will create, or Linux, it should create a file on your desktop, or no, it's on in your home folder, which will have the environment variable path added to it. So anyway, that's pretty much all there is to installing Anaconda. And once it's installed, you should be able to open either a regular command prompt. In Mac or Linux, it'd be a terminal, and you should be able to type Python. It should take you into your Python 3. You should be able to type IPython. I think that should be installed by default with Anaconda. If not, you can do conda install IPython, and this will I don't know how to make this larger, but so we can do conda install Python or IPython if it's not installed, but it should be by default. And then lastly and importantly, we should have Jupyter Notebook installed, and that will open up in a browser our Jupyter Notebook interface. And so a lot of the starter code I have is in Jupyter Notebooks, and the reason for that is that when we make a Jupyter Notebook, it allows us to do lots of things. Let's see. So we can import things, and then we can also like plot things and save outputs. And the nice thing about them is we can save them as, say, like a PDF, either by printing it. So you can print it as a PDF, or you can also download it as a PDF, which if you want to download it as a PDF, then you'll have to install LaTeX, which it has instructions for how to do that here in the error message. So it shows how to do it in Linux, Mac, or Windows. So that's an optional extra step you can take if you want to export things as PDFs. But anyway, Jupyter Notebooks are just a nice tool for sharing and interactively running code, and also saving our outputs. Okay, so that's installing Python in Anaconda and running Jupyter Notebook. And then Control-C back from the terminal will stop the Jupyter Notebook. And then it tells us it's no longer running. So we can close that. So the one, and let me just close this. So we can also use Windows PowerShell if we want to run these things, or there's also an Anaconda Prompt. And if you didn't check that box to add things to your path, you can always use the Anaconda Prompt. So some things you're probably going to want to do are make a folder for the class, and then store your work in that class. So these are just kind of basic terminal commands. I believe in the getting started file I have some links to basics on command prompts and terminals for Windows and Mac. And I think DataCamp may even have some things on that now. I'm not sure. But anyway, so I'm just making a folder, changing into that folder here, and then I'm going to make a folder called Week 1. One nice trick is if you start typing the name of a folder or file, press the Tab key, it auto-completes it. So I've created this file path in my user directory, and then 682, and then Week 1. So this is where I might store my files for the Week 1 assignments. And then I can do Jupyter Notebook, Week 1 assignment, something like that. Oops, and actually, we should just open Jupyter Notebook first and make a new file if we don't have one. So this is the Jupyter Notebook interface, and we can go on the very upper right and say New, and then go to Python 3. So within our notebook, we can do the assignment here. The starter code for Week 1 is in a Jupyter Notebook. And so, oops. So, sorry, bug. So we can just open up that starter code with Jupyter Notebook from the command line. And I think it's best to do it from the command line rather than from the Anaconda navigator, which also allows us to open up Jupyter Notebooks, but I don't think it allows us to open them up in a certain location on our computer like doing it through the command line does. Also, if it's not working for some reason, we can see why here, whereas if it's in the Anaconda navigator, it might be harder to debug problems. And speaking of problems, the latest Anaconda installer, so the latest Anaconda installer has one small bug with it, which causes Jupyter Notebook to not run. And by latest, I mean the one that was at the time of this video latest, which is from October 15th, 2019. So if you use that one to install, you're going to have a problem running Jupyter Notebook the first time. And the solution to that is to open up one of these terminals or command prompts, do pip uninstall pyzmq, and then it's going to ask you, do you want to install that? So we say yes. And then we do, okay, so I think we have to open this as an administrator. It's running a little slow because it's in a virtual machine. So right-click that, run as administrator. Pip uninstall PyZMQ. And actually, you know what? It might not be working because the Jupyter Notebook is running. So let me shut that down, try this again. Uninstall PyZMQ. Oh, it already uninstalled it, I guess. Okay, so pip install PyZMQ. So that's all there is to fix it with that October 15th installer, is uninstall PyZMQ and then reinstall PyZMQ using pip. There's just a bug with the latest installer where that fixes it. The other option is to just search for this Anaconda installer archive, and from here you can go back to the July 25th installer and use that. So it's got Mac OS and Windows OS. So the one with the 64 being the 64-bit version, which is probably the one you want to use. So that's the other option, is to use the older installer. And yeah, so a little thing about Windows command prompts, if you click in them, then it actually pauses whatever is running, which is kind of annoying, so you have to press enter to resume it. So just check that this is Jupyter Notebook is working after that uninstall and reinstall. Looks like it's working. Okay. So that's getting started with installing Python and running Jupyter Notebooks. All right, so the next part would be so Anaconda also has a nice feature where you can create virtual environments, and these are a little intimidating at first, but they're actually pretty simple. So a virtual environment is just a container where we have a certain versions of software in there, and so we can create these virtual environments with Anaconda for different Python versions. So for example, if we want to create like a Python 2.7 version, we could do it like that. So Conda create -n for the name, py2 test is what I'll call it, and then Python version 2.7. So it takes a while. Oftentimes when it's sitting there doing this solving environment step, it can take a while, especially if your computer is not fast. But anyway, so we just hit yes to proceed once that gets started, and it downloads the Python version, which takes a while, and then installs it all. And then once we have our environment created, we can do conda activate and then the environment name. So let me see which environments I have here that I can actually use. So let's activate this Python 2 environment that I have right here. And so once I do that, it changes this base label on the left to Python 2, so that shows us we're in the Python 2 environment here. And now if I run Python, for example, it's running Python 2, and it's running that from our virtual environment folder. And so that's kind of a nice thing about Anaconda, is you can do that if you need to. And then Control-D will exit that. Control-D closes the terminal. If you want to exit the environment, you can do conda deactivate. Okay. So that's most of that. Yeah, so I think after that there's a couple files, the Python Basics and Python Functions tutorial. So the Python Basics file, so it goes through some of the very basic things in Python. You can also get a similar experience going through, say, the Kaggle courses. So Kaggle courses, there's a Python course. You can probably get a similar experience there, or from the Data Camp Intro to Python, or there's many other Intro to Pythons out there. There's $10 Udemy courses with intros to Python, which can get you started quickly. But this one also kind of shows some things about Jupyter Notebooks, which are helpful. So within Jupyter Notebooks, we can have these, by default, there's code cells like this, and so they run code, Python code. So we can print out something, for example, but we can also have Markdown cells. And so these Markdown cells are just a cell that we've changed the type here in this menu to Markdown. So we can change that to code or to Markdown. And Markdown is just a nice way to show text. So I have like a link here. We just put the text in square brackets and the link in parentheses, and that makes a nice link for us. We can also make things like headings with pound signs and many other things. So this link that I have in the Python Basics is a cheat sheet of ways you can use Markdown to make all sorts of different things like lists, images, code, tables, yada yada yada. Okay, so that's Markdown. So when you're doing your assignments, you should put your written analysis in some Markdown cells because it'll look nicer, easier to read, and it also auto wraps the lines so they don't spill out too far. And there's also a hotkey to switch between Markdown and code cells, which is the M and the Y keys. And also if you press the H key, it brings up these keyboard shortcuts, which you can also find from Help Keyboard Shortcuts. And so that shows all the different hotkeys that you have. There's quite a lot. I only use a few of them. I use this change cell to Markdown, change cell to code. Frequently I'll delete cells, and then I'll also insert cells above and below. And those are basically all the hotkeys that I use. So you can press the A key to insert a cell above, B to insert a cell below, 2 Ds to delete a cell, and M to go to Markdown, Y to go to code. That's about all I use. You also want to use the arrow keys if you want to move around in the Jupyter Notebook, so up and down arrow keys. But then if you're on a cell and you press the Enter key, it takes you into the cell. So notice my cursor is in there now, and my arrow keys now actually go in the cell. And if I press the up arrow when I'm at the top of the cell, it goes to the cell above it. So you can navigate the cells like that. To run a cell with, say, like code or Markdown in it, you can do Control plus Enter or Shift plus Enter. And I think it's Command Enter on Mac, maybe. But Shift Enter is what I usually use. It runs the cell, and then it moves on to the next one. So Shift Enter, keeps moving. Okay. So as far as Python itself, this is a text analytics course, so we're going to use lots of these string types of variables. So a variable is just any sort of kind of like holds a value in our programming language. So if we give a name to a variable called a string and then give it this ABC value, we can print out that value of the variable, and we can also change it if we want to. So a variable is just like a placeholder for something. And so there's different types, and the most important one we're going to use in this class is the string. So there's lots of things you can do with it, like add them together, which actually just combines them, and so on. We're also going to use lists. Lists are kind of like the base variable type in Python. So this, or it's like not the base variable type, but it's one of the most widely used variables in Python. So this list looks like that. It's in square brackets, and we separate the values in it with a comma, and we can iterate through them with something like a for loop. So this for t in test list goes through each item in the list, and then so we can use this syntax where we say for each item in the list, give it a colon, and then in the next line we indent the line, and we can give it some code to run with this variable t. And this variable t could be called anything. We could call it item and then print that item. So that's how we can kind of loop through items in a list. And they have a ton of built-in methods, which I've linked here. But one very useful one is we can start with an empty list, which is just 2 square brackets. And then we can just append to that list. And this range 10, the way to actually look at what that is doing is to wrap this range 10 function in a list function, and then it converts that to a list. So range 10 just goes from 0 to 9. In Python, this list indexing starts at 0, which we'll get to in a second. But anyway, so we can use this append method on an empty list to add to it. And so if we go through those values 0 to 9, we can add them to a list and get out our list. And you can also check the type of variables with type. So importantly, with lists in Python, we index them, and so we index them by giving our list variable name, square bracket, and then the start, colon, the stop, colon, and then the step. And so the indexing for the list starts at 0. So the first element of this list is 0, so if we say, give me the first element of the list, it looks like that. If we want to get everything up, we want to get the first 2 elements, we can leave the start blank and then give a colon and then say 2. That gives us the first 2 elements. If we want to step through the list by 2s, we can leave the start and the stop blank and then give it the step value of 2. Or we can reverse the list by giving it a step value of -1. And then there's a couple other things in Python that are good to know about. The set, which is like a list, but it's unique values. It's like a mathematical set. It's got this set function to convert a list into a set. And that's important because when we're checking for if something is in a list, we can, basically it's much more efficient to check if it's in a set than if it's in a list. And that has something to do with what's called hashing, which is kind of a more complex computer science topic, which you can look up more if you're interested in it, hashing. And the last thing is a dictionary, which can be useful because we can have a key and a value pair. So if we want to look up some value for some key, we can do that with a dictionary. List comprehensions are kind of like a nice trick in Python, and it's part of the bonus for week 1, so you can look at this if you want to and learn more about it. I definitely encourage you to do so. And then lastly, functions are in all programming languages. I have an entire file here on Python functions tutorial, which you can go through if you want to. It goes through a little more detail about functions. But in general, functions look like this, where we've got the same code we looked at above, where we make a blank list, loop through the numbers 0 through 9, and then just add those to the list. With a function, though, we've got this keyword def for define. We've got a function name, and then we've got some round brackets with a colon at the end. And so that's how all our functions start and look. And then we give whatever content we have in the function, which is indented by 4 spaces. If you just press return after the function declaration, I think in Jupyter Notebook it automatically indents, but if not, you can press the tab key. And then at the end we've got this return, which gives us back something from the function. So if we run that, we define the function here, and then we can use it here. We can also give them arguments. So for example, in our week 1 assignment, we're going to give our function an argument of some text. And you can kind of look at this example for some more details on how these arguments work. And then also in the Python functions tutorial, there's a little bit more on how those arguments work. So I think that's kind of an overview, quick start of using Python and Jupyter Notebooks, as well as using functions. See the other video that's linked in the week 1 assignment for an overview of this starter, where we make a function that cleans text and then actually test it on some real-world text. All right, we'll see you next time. Bye.